My analyses of Rahm Kota will draw from his appearances in the Force Unleashed series, specifically the first and second video games, the Xbox and PlayStation versions, the first and second novelizations, both by Sean Williams, the first and second graphic novels, the first and second strategy guides, and the Force Unleashed campaign guide. My analyses of Darth Wredd will draw from his appearances in the Legacy Volume II comic series, published from 2013 to 2014, with additional information from the Legacy Handbook and the Volume II Addendum, and the Legacy Era Campaign Guide. For background information, I will be referencing the Jedi Path, the Essential Guide to the Force, and the Complete Visual Dictionary, among others. Rahm Kota and Darth Wredd were both out of step with their contemporaries. Both were adult recruits within orders that emphasized training from birth, with existing combat experience that shaped their development, and both truly peaked after the fall of their respective orders, with no established hierarchy to restrain them. If these two Renegade survivors were to meet in single combat, who would win? Rahm Kota was a human male of unspecified age, though likely in his late 50s to early 60s. Unusually for a Jedi, Kota was recruited at age 18, having spent his adolescence as a child soldier on his war-torn homeworld. Kota was a battle-scarred veteran with a history of severe injury, the most notable being his burnt-out, sightless eyes, the result of a lightsaber strike to the face from Galen Marek. A lifelong combatant, he boasted a towering, robust physique, maintaining an exceptional level of fitness despite his age. His strongest attributes were strength and agility, leveraged through his dynamic and intense fighting style, maneuvering with running charges, acrobatics, and rolls, driving his lightsaber strikes with his entire body. Furthermore, Kota was one of the few Jedi who wore combat armor. As a Rebel Alliance general, he wore a full-plated cuirass with pauldrons and gauntlets over top of what appeared to be a padded utility suit. The plates were likely composed of durasteel, a proven lightsaber countermeasure that could turn aside glancing blows. Even by Jedi standards, Kota's endurance and tolerance for pain were inhuman. When dropped into the Tarko Se arena for public execution, he successfully fought off gladiators and beasts for 7 days straight, shrugging off numerous major wounds in the process. Despite the severity of his injuries, the Rebel Alliance medic who treated Kota after his rescue strongly suspected that the general was in no real danger. Darth Wredd was a human male of unspecified age, though likely in his mid to late 20s. Unusually for a Sith of that era, he was recruited as an adult, already come into his own as a blacksmith-turned-medieval warrior on his low-tech homeworld of Mala. Wredd boasted a towering muscular physique and was distinguished by the facial scars left by the torture mask he was forced to wear during his Sith training. Accordingly, his primary trait was his incredible tolerance for pain and injury, routinely shrugging off physical blows and enduring a lightsaber strike to the face, which gouged out his eye. Wredd concealed the wound by rebuilding his Sith torture mask into a half-helmet, adding on to the stolen Imperial Knight armor he wore. Designed specifically for lightsaber dueling, Imperial Knight armor consisted of heavy durasteel plating over top of an armor-weave bodysuit, itself laced with Frike alloy fibers. The armor featured a chest piece and backplates, pauldrons and gauntlets, and a codpiece and greaves, alongside Redd's add-on half-helm. Curiously, Wredd's armor set appeared to lack the standard-issue pure cortosis gauntlets. Addressing Darth Wredd's athletic performance, his primary attributes were strength and agility, manhandling targets with the former, and recklessly lunging at enemies with the latter. He possessed sufficient dexterity to manage twin lightsabers, though his core technique was less than perfect. Wredd's approach was based around supplanting skill with raw physical performance, compensating for his thinly spread technique through sheer intensity and physical fortitude. Both are human males, so there are no significant anatomical factors, though there is a substantial age gap, at minimum 30 years. Though their personal backgrounds were only superficially similar, both were experienced combatants prior to their recruitment, and both boasted towering muscular builds honed by their training. Intriguingly, both were sight-impaired, though Wredd was down only one eye where Kota was completely blind. The primary trait of both combatants was physical hardiness and tolerance for pain, both demonstrating a similar ability to fight through pain and injury. Rahm Kota endured a week-long grind in the Tarkosay arena. Darth Wredd spent a minimum of 2 to 3 years locked inside a torture helmet. What tips the scales in Wredd's favor is his equipment, Imperial Knight armor being specifically designed for lightsaber dueling and boasting much more substantial plating, which Wredd further supplemented. Addressing their athletic performance, I consider them generally comparable in all areas, with a similar balance ratio. However, the simple fact of the matter is that Wredd has youth on his side, where Kota, though still exceptional, is over the hill. Rahm Kota wielded a robust standard lightsaber that projected a green plasma blade, likely generated by an Ilum crystal. Confirmed in the Force Unleashed campaign guide was Kota's chosen lightsaber discipline, the Ferocity form Juyo. As one of the most advanced and intensive martial arts in the setting, the study of Juyo could only be attempted by those who have mastered multiple other fighting forms. Though Kota's support styles have not been confirmed, based on descriptions of his technique in the Force Unleashed novelization and his in-game combat animations, I believe that he employed Shicho, Ataru, and Shien, all three being common forms that emphasized general combat. Rahm Kota's personal technique was extremely physical, maneuvering with acrobatics, rolls, and running charges, using these dynamic full-body motions to deliver sweeping slashes and chops. His defensive component consisted of stalwart two-handed blocks, and he was noted for his expert force integration. In application, he alternated between frenzied assaults, slow and steady probing, and stonewall defensive postures. In single combat, Kota would open defensively, assessing the threat and adapting his approach, cycling between various attack patterns and powers over the course of the fight. However, his track record in single combat was spotty. Against Galen Merrick, he was whittled down and overpowered, and against Boba Fett, he overextended and took a rifle stock to the face. Kota was merely competent as a duelist, with his most impressive feats instead relating to general combat. He was one of the most successful Jedi generals during the Clone Wars, he waged an effective guerrilla campaign against the Empire, and he ran the gauntlet in the Tarkosay arena for a week straight. Darth Wredd made a habit of appropriating lightsabers throughout his career, but consistently favored the standard Sith lightsaber with the bloodshine blade. Though Wredd's chosen martial disciplines have not been established, my educated guess is rudimentary knowledge of Naiman, Jarkai, and Teras Kasi. These were the primary techniques mastered by Darth Wredd, the founder of the One Sith Order, all the members of which displaying a corresponding emphasis on force integration, alternative weapons training, and hand-to-hand combat, Wredd included. He drove his simplistic offensive style with a dynamic physical component, striking fast and hard. He flung himself at adversaries with upright acrobatic lunges, and supplemented lightsaber combat with grapples and mauling strikes. His blade work was strength-based, centered around hacking cleaves, heavy thrusts, and stalwart blocks, clearly influenced by his medieval longsword technique. His twin lightsaber technique was evidently thrust-centric. Darth Wredd was an ambush predator, and most of his strategies revolved around creating diversions to enable treacherous sneak attacks. In this manner, he backstabbed his Sith master, surprised Fanost, and wounded Empress Marasiah Fel. His perfect tandem use of lightsaber combat and force abilities allowed him to quickly dispatch Anya Solo's party, notably pulling AG-37 into his lightsaber strike and penetrating Jawa Sam's armor with thrown debris. However, Wredd's core technique was lackluster, taking a hit from Jawa Sam and getting outfenced by Yalta Val. But more often than not, Wredd was able to soldier on to victory by taking the hits and hitting back just as hard, as the Katamai Sith infiltrator would attest. Regardless of the number of lightsabers Darth Wredd carried throughout his career, he typically only carried one at a time. Both wielded standard lightsabers, functionally distinguished only by the differences in handling and cutting power between Ilum crystals and Bloodshine synthetics. Assuming that I am correct about their respective primary lightsaber forms, then they have opposing skill configurations, Kota's Juyo acting as a funnel for the component mechanics of Shicho, Ataru, and Shien, while Wredd layered Naiman, Jarkai, and Teras Kasi on top of each other. Their strength-based lightsaber techniques were superficially similar, a dynamic physical component to drive direct blade work. However, Kota employed a wider range of acrobatic maneuvers, though he could be blindsided by physical combat. But on the other hand, Kota's core lightsaber technique was much stronger, displaying greater depth and range of application, where Wredd relied on alternative skills for his variation. Kota's defensive opening is a good foil for Wredd's ambushes, but he has come up short against Wredd's total integration of lightsaber and force powers in Galen Marek. Conversely, Wredd's rougher technique put him at a disadvantage against the more consistent styles of Jawa Sam and Yalta Val, and Kota is nothing if not consistent. Additionally, Kota also employs telekinetic integration, in fact favoring many of Wredd's tactics. Unfortunately, Kota's inexperience in single combat led to him overextending against Boba Fett, a non-force sensitive bounty hunter, where Wredd was a highly experienced Sith hunter who routinely contended with opponents above his own level. Both are optimized to exploit the other's weaknesses, Kota with his stronger technique, and Wredd with his dueling experience. Rahm Kota was one of the rare exceptions to the Jedi Order's policy of only recruiting young children and infants. My belief is that his upbringing as a child soldier fostered the development of rudimentary force abilities, with the Order bringing him into the fold because they didn't want him running around unsupervised. As an outspoken militant, his martial focus strongly suggested that he trained as a Jedi Guardian. Given that Kota was initially recruited by Mace Windu, I think it's possible that he was, in fact, one of the Corran Master's former Padawans, hence his training in Form 7, channeling his emotions to drive physical enhancement. As he is known to have survived multiple severe injuries without receiving proper medical attention, I think it's more than likely that he was a master of Force heal. Furthermore, he employed rudimentary Tutaminis to partially redirect Galen Merrick's Force lightning. Kota's most obvious sensibility was Force sight, which he relied on to compensate for his physical blindness, and allowing him to detect cloaked enemies. On the topic of vision, he possessed the gift of farsight, experiencing a vision of his own future as Galen Merrick's Jedi Master. Otherwise, he was adept at the basic Jedi mind trick. I consider Kota's most developed power to be telekinesis. His kinetic output was sufficient to deform metal and destroy heavy machinery, his lifting strength was several tons, and he could manipulate multiple objects at a time. His demonstrated applications include Force Push, Force Pull, Force Grip, Force Throw, and Force Wave. Defensively, his active Force Shield could repel even lightsaber strikes, while his passive telekinetic defenses forced Merrick to subvert him with thrown objects, though Darth Vader overpowered him effortlessly. Conversely, Kota successfully bypassed Emperor Palpatine's Force defenses and stole his lightsaber. Kota's application of his Force abilities was much like his lightsaber skills, effective in single combat against other Force adepts, but optimized for the battlefield. He expertly integrated Force strikes into lightsaber combat and together with one another, one of his favorite tactics being to cocoon himself in a Force shield while turning every loose object into a lethal projectile. He emphasized defense and counter, his redirection of Merrick's lightning being a good example of Kota using an opponent's energies against them. However, though Rahm Kota's skill set covered all of his bases, he simply wasn't an experienced Force duelist, and wasn't prepared for Force power attack chains, overcommitment to one form of defense, leaving him vulnerable to a different form of attack. Much like the Jedi Order, the one Sith Order preferred to start training at infancy, making the adult recruit Darth Wredd an anomaly. He began as a self-taught Force warrior on Mala, emulating the Jedi and stepping up as the guardian of his people. His raw talent brought him to the attention of the Sith, who subjected him to brutal torture and indoctrination. However, though his Sith Master's superior strength ensured his dominance, his brutish nature left him easily manipulated, ironically fostering Wredd's development as a schemer and strategist. The Sith torture mask Wredd was locked into taught him to feed his power with hatred and pain, driving physical enhancement and fighting through injury. However, he never demonstrated any skill with energy-based powers, instead defending against Force lightning with his lightsaber. On the other hand, Wredd was capable of concealing his Force signature, infiltrating the residence of the Katamai Sith infiltrator, breaking into a military prison on Coruscant, right under the noses of the Imperial Knights and the Jedi, and evading detection by the gathered Sith on Mala, allowing him to ambush Fanost. Wredd's primary offensive power was telekinesis. His lifting strength was several tons, and his demonstrated range of application included Force Push, Force Pull, Force Grip, and Force Throw. Though he freely employed direct telekinesis against non-Force wielders, Wredd consistently relied on thrown objects when pitted against Imperial Knights and Sith, suggesting that he was incapable of penetrating Force defenses, while his own defenses have never been tested. He successfully dispatched Zhao Assam with thrown debris, while Yalta Val successfully destroyed Redd's thrown boulder with his lightsaber. On a larger scale, Redd combined powers with Assam to topple the wreckage of the Carreras Array, crushing hundreds of Sith. Darth Wredd wielded his Force abilities in perfect tandem with lightsaber combat, one to support the other. His success was predicated on his balance, working around his lack of power by leveraging all of his abilities in tandem. Given that his lack of development as a duelist has led to him taking hits against stronger swordsmen, it's only logical to assume that the same is true of his Force abilities. However, despite his limitations, Redd's ingenuity and ferocity made him a force to be reckoned with. As adult recruits in organizations founded on the indoctrination of children, Rahm Kota and Darth Wredd were out of step with their peers, though to very different degrees. Kota was merely outspoken, where Wredd actually went rogue. Their development was heavily influenced by their respective backgrounds, but where Kota's training and skill set added up cohesively, Wredd was a contradiction, an assassin trying to reinvent himself as a cavalier. Both drove physical enhancement with focused emotion, Kota through the disciplines of Juyo, Wredd by channeling his hatred. Though Redd's ability to feed off pain allows him to capitalize on injury, Kota's probable mastery of Force Heal would make him the only one who could actually mitigate injury. However, Kota's Tutaminis isn't applicable, as Wredd didn't use Force Lightning. As the idea of either combatant using active telepathic manipulation against the other is downright laughable, the only relevant sensibilities were Redd's Force Concealment versus Kota's Force Sight. Though the dark side ending of The Force Unleashed 2 is non-canon, the existence of the Dark Apprentice and his presence on the Spire is confirmed, and is therefore a clear example of Kota's perceptions being fooled by Force Concealment. However, though Wredd successfully hid himself from the assembled Sith on Mala, his application clearly wasn't as powerful as the apprentice's, who could render himself completely invisible. Their respective applications of telekinesis were quite similar, but Kota's greater development and power gives him a substantial advantage. Unlike Wredd, Kota has demonstrated defensive powers, has demonstrated that he can contend with defensive powers, and has demonstrated that he can employ multiple telekinetic abilities in tandem. Though Kota came up short against Redd's subversive tactics in Galen Marek, Marek is substantially more powerful than Wredd, to the point where he outclassed Kota. Quite simply, Rahm Kota's greater power and skill provides a tangible advantage over Darth Wredd, whose ability to turn the tables is predicated on circumstantial factors. Though, to be fair, Wredd has achieved a great deal on the back of circumstantial factors. The main commonality between Rahm Kota and Darth Wredd is how their unusual backgrounds influenced their development, resulting in similar fighter types that deviated quite sharply from the standard mold of their respective orders. Both were extremely robust physically, their success heavily predicated on their ability to soak up punishment and keep moving forward, but Wredd is younger and better armored. Both were gritty, pragmatic swordsmen, but Kota had a stronger core technique, where Wredd was spread thin between alternative techniques. Both used their Force abilities to weaponize their environments and blindside opponents, but Kota was simply more powerful. What Darth Wredd has going for him is his greater experience as a duelist, specifically against higher-level opponents, and Kota's proven difficulty dealing with Wredd's subversive integration tactics, demonstrated against Galen Marek. However, despite his inexperience in single combat, Rahm Kota has only come up short against combatants equal to or greater than himself, and as brutal as Wredd may be, he is not on the level with either Galen Marek or Boba Fett. Instead, Kota's stronger lightsaber technique and more developed force abilities optimize him to defend against everything Wredd is bringing to the table and to exploit Wredd's inconsistencies. Unless Wredd successfully ambushes Kota and lands an immediately fatal death blow, unlikely given Kota's foresight, this battle will be a war of attrition, one that Wredd isn't prepared to wage. Due to Kota's comparable physical fortitude, this fight will not be ended by a single hit, and Kota's more consistent style and greater power leaves him primed to deliver most of the hits. Though Yalta Val came up short against Wredd's master, just as Rahm Kota came up short against Galen Marek, he did not come up short against Wredd himself, and by that same token, neither would Kota. Darth Wredd is without a doubt a credible threat, but he is ultimately a manageable one. I declare Rahm Kota the victor.